on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
And on today's Newsmaker Show, we have with us Stephen Walker and Greg Hardy. They're going to be talking about an art exhibit that's coming up soon in Andover. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Brian.
Well, it's a local art, a local Celtic art exhibit, and it's going to go from Friday, the 21st, until Saturday, the 29th, in your old location, Stephen. Tell us more about it.
Well, I was telling my story about how, we get a lot of customers in my Celtic jewelry store, and if they're from out of the area, a lot of times they ask, well, why Andover? Why are you here? And, I grew up here, but there is a tradition of Celtic art in Andover. In fact, it's one of the hot spots in the United States for Celtic art. And as I was telling the story, my first exposure to Celtic art was a little book my grandmother brought me back in 1968 after she made a trip to Ireland. And I saw that towards the summer of 1968, and I was getting very, excited about that. I was trying to draw some Celtic designs based on what I could copy, really, from the book. And then I was going to Alfred Almond at the time, and I met Kevin McCrae, who was my age. He invited me to his 11th birthday party. So I went out to the McCrae farm, and his father was the art teacher at Andover, and he's really like the father of Celtic art in this area. He'd been doing this sort of thing his whole life. He began teaching in Andover in 1958. So we got up to their place, and he was out painting his mailbox actually that day, and with a Celtic design and a thistle, and it was a great party. Actually, I met a lot of Andover boys, because the McCrae boys had been there in school in Andover also. And a few weeks later, my family made the decision to move to Andover based on finding a house they liked in Andover. So, and as I was telling the story to a customer, I realized this was 50 years ago, right? Exactly 50 years ago. So this Friday, the 21st, is actually the 50th anniversary of that birthday party and that meeting. So, for me, it's very, significant, but it's not just about me. It's about, about 20 or 25 other people who've used Celtic art as part of their life.
Now, when I think of Celtic, I think usually Irish and Scottish, but the Brits are in there too?
Well, yeah, they are, but, this is kind of what we've absorbed. Some of the people that are doing this might not have very much Celtic blood at all, and some very much do. My family's mainly Scottish with a little bit of Irish, but and Celtic art usually is a reference to your ancestry. It's kind of an acknowledgement and an honoring of that. But it's beautiful stuff, and a lot of other people like it too.
Sure thing. Now, not to get off the topic of the upcoming art festival, but just kind of curious. A lot of the we think of Irish and Scottish and English people, coming to America, but they have gone to other countries, and I know that a lot of people from all over the world go to your website to get your Celtic jewelry. Mm-hmm. Do you ever get people of Irish, Scottish, or English descent who would be in a place like, New Zealand or Australia, places like that the Irish, Scottish, and British also went to?
Yeah, surprising. Well, of course, there's a lot in Canada, and Canada's not that far.
Sure.
We get a lot of people that actually come to our shop from Canada, but New Zealand, but we also get a lot of people, our international customers. Like there was a Scottish customer who was actually running a gym and Zumba classes and things like that on the Isle of Cyprus, and he ordered engagement ring from us for, he was Scottish born, and we get a lot of things like these very Celtic rover people who are all over the world, and they kind of go to us as their jeweler. So
Interesting. Back to the art exhibit. Yes, if you could tell us about the the look and the feel, and what kind of art exhibits are we going to be looking at?
Well, actually, after we're just getting around to setting it up this morning. After we're done here, we're heading back, and Greg and I are going to we've set it up. You want to describe some of the things we have, Greg?
Well, I was just trying to count this morning, including pieces. I'm still picking pieces up this afternoon from a couple of contributors, and I know we just crossed the 50 mark in terms of pieces that'll be on display, and it includes every medium that you can think of. A lot of wood, sculpture, carvings, calligraphy, plenty of two-dimensional work, calligraphy with illuminations and that sort of thing, and metalwork, obviously Steve's jewelry, those sorts of things. So it's pretty widespread in terms of what we'll be showing.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of the jewelry is going to be my apprentices. I'm actually going to show some things I did in early sculptures and things from my student days, things which aren't for sale and usually aren't shown in the store. So
those are 35 and 40-year-old pieces. Some of them.
Yeah, 40 years old. Yeah, we're going to be old guys here. So, but and then we keep imagining new things. This morning I was thinking of some sweaters that some cable knit sweaters that my mom made back in the 70s and 80s, and these are original designs. She wasn't just working from a pattern book. My mom's Barbara Walker, and there was a woman named Barbara Walker who wrote a knitting book, coincidentally, and she taught you how to do cable knits, and the other Barbara Walker actually showed you how to close the curve if you're doing doing an interlaced thing. You can do more than just a braid. You can kind of make it loop back up, up and back down again, which is innovation. It's something that's growing.
Now, I heard the name John McHenry in the commercial earlier this hour, that he would be a part of this.
Yes, John has given us, there again, these are things that are not for sale. He's loaned us brooches that he's made for each of his children on the occasion of their weddings. And these are, some of his most heartfelt work. They're really beautiful pieces.
I think it also included, there was one brooch that was an anniversary gift to his wife, a cross for his baby, who's no longer a baby, when his daughter was born. So I think there are 5 or 6 of John's pieces.
Yeah, and this is, a lot of these pieces were not made for, not made for the market. These are things that were made, for gifts to specific people, or, from a purer form of inspiration. And this is, as I say, some of these things are student pieces. Some of these things are, things people have done as a pastime or as an enthusiasm. And a lot of times that kind of labor of love really is, produces some awesome things that you might not be able to make if you were worrying about time and price and things like, market considerations.
One of the things that's kind of important about this show, in my opinion, Steve points out, many of these things were made by an artist for a friend or a family member.
Sure.
And what ends up happening is that these go from the shop to that person's living room or their jewelry box or the wall in their kitchen, and the public never gets to see them. So some of these things are pieces of art that have not been formally shown any place or ever photographed, even many of them. So that's one of our tasks over the next couple of days, is to create something of a photo essay of all of the pieces, because some of them have been around a long time and never been seen. So
Stephen Walker, you you get a lot of international business these days. Wondering, have you advertised this art display online? And will people be coming in from maybe overseas, or as you say, Canada?
I don't think there be anybody coming from overseas, although we're getting a lot of encouragement. We have a group of Celtic artists that have been communicating regularly since about the year 2000. First through a Yahoo group, and now we've kind of moved it over to a Facebook group. And there's people from Ireland and from New Zealand, from really the whole world that are involved in this. A few years ago, we created the International Day of Celtic Art, which is June 9th, also St. Columba's Day. And we were able to get about 20 different events worldwide, and there is a community. It's kind of a small community, really. There's several hundred people who are enrolled in this thing, but there's probably more like 30 that are active, and some people like Greg pretty much just lurk there, and others post several times a week. There's a tattoo artist in California that does some really ambitious Celtic art, and actually that's one of the things that's really changed with Celtic art over the past 1,000 years. A lot of it was very public in the way back when, and I say that Andover is a hot spot. The other hot spot in the United States is Chicago. And Chicago's story is very, very different than ours. They have some very public Celtic art. There's Old St. Pat's Catholic Church downtown, which is just a splendid Celtic revival thing. And their story really begins with the 1893 World's Fair, when a lot of reproductions of Irish masterpieces were exhibited. And one of the best living Celtic artists is Michael Carroll, who's actually just this week started teaching a course in how to do Celtic art. He's got something like 6 students, which he's real happy about.
Talking this morning with Stephen Walker and Greg Hardy about the upcoming art exhibit that's going to be in Andover, a local Celtic art exhibit. We're going to take a quick break, then check the forecast. Stay with us.
Kevin Harlan here from Westwood One with a preview of Monday Night Football. Hall of Famer Kurt Warner and I will be on hand as the Seattle Seahawks take on the Chicago Bears. Can All-Pro Khalil Mack shut down quarterback Russell Wilson and the Seattle offense? And how will the Seattle defense take on the Bears' new-look offense? Join us to find out and hear the NFL all season long from Westwood One.
The NFL on Westwood One. Tonight at 7:30 on AM 1480 WLEA.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carroll. And Rob, of course, a lot of the talk is less about the weather in the Carolinas. A lot of the talk is about the Weather Channel faking a scene. Did you happen to catch that?
I did. I'm not surprised. We have this discussion all the time when we go out and try and, sell our services. People will say, well, why are you any different than the Weather Channel or the local TV guys? And it's a different philosophy. The Weather Channel is trying to bring people back, and the local TV guys, later in the day to watch again. Their business is paid by commercials. People have to be watching to see the commercials. So they'll give you the worst case scenario. They'll try and give you the worst case. In our case, where we actually charge for our services, our goal is to pass along the information. We're trying to give you the best possible forecast that we can. We look at the data. This is what we see. This is what we're going to think is going to happen.
Now, do you think that guy was ordered to do that, or you think he just did that on his own?
It could have been one or two ways. They may have told him to make it look good, or he may have decided, to make it look good. I have no idea, but it's a philosophy. There is a philosophy behind weather on television. I know TV meteorologists. I went to college with Jim Cantori. He was 2 years ahead of me. I used to play softball with him. Most of the data that's taken in is visual by human beings. If they can make it look spectacular, it's going to, get the listener enthralled. It's going to keep them glued to the television. That's what they want. I look at it from the standpoint of, what would my mom, dad, sister, brother do with the information I gave them? Today is not going to be too bad, but we do have a decent amount of rain headed our way, Brian, because we're going to be dealing with the remnants of Florence, and there's going to be a sharp cutoff to who gets a lot of rain and who gets very little. Sunrise this morning was at 6:53. It'll set tonight at 7:16. Clouds will continue to thicken across the southern tier, and we will see some rain later today, 75. That rain may come down hard at times tonight, could pick up an inch or two. Overnight lows 65 to 70. The rain should be out of here by early tomorrow afternoon, 75 to 80. Clouds tomorrow night, 60 to 65. Then Wednesday we turn partly sunny, 70 to 75. Nice day Thursday. Cold front could bring us some showers on Friday.
And we're back on the Newsmaker show today with Stephen Walker and Greg Hardy. Now, we were talking during the break. You both had the same art teacher back in school in Andover.
Yeah, actually, our art teacher's name was William McCrae, Scotty McCrae, and as Steve mentioned, besides being an art teacher, he was a working Celtic artist, and it was kind of part of what we saw as kids growing up. Steve and I discussed this the other day. Probably if he had not been here, if he had not been our art teacher, I think many of us might have gravitated toward this work anyway. We all had those interests, but having Scotty on hand was really, it was convenient and connected to our interest in Celtic art even as young kids.
But one of the things that was really fortunate for us is that Celtic art became very popular in the 1990s, but we were exposed to it 20 years earlier in the 70s and the 60s, and there's very little continuity. Most of the in the rest of the world, I'll say there's very little continuity. Most of the Celtic artists are self-taught. There's very few. Celtic art's gone through a whole bunch of different revivals. There was a revival from about 1850 to maybe 1920 or so. And that kind of faded away, and then the new renaissance of Celtic art, which we're really part of, began in the 70s, but it really came into its own in the 90s. But McCrae was somebody who was really a bridge, and I only know of 2 or 3 people who were bridges. The others, my friend Aidan Breen, who you had on Kevin had on the Newsmaker show about 10 years ago. He came over and paid us a visit, and he was another bridge from the old Celtic revival into the Celtic Renaissance.
Now, Greg, you've got some artwork too that'll be seen. Can you tell us about that?
I sure can. I have a number of pieces that I've made over the years in a variety of mediums. I've been carving for most of the time since I was in high school, so I've got at least one piece that's a carved cross. There's some copper work that I did, variety of things. But what I'm really doing today, and actually full time since I retired from my real gig, is I've been making pens for several years, and a couple of pieces that will be on display are fountain pens that happen to have Celtic knotwork on them incorporated into the metalwork of the pens.
Yeah, you hear people talk about Celtic knotwork as if that's all there is to Celtic design, and that's not entirely true. It is probably the most emblematic of the motifs, but there's also a lot of spirals. There's a whole style of interpreting, people and animals. There's repetitious tiling, geometric tiling and step designs. Key patterns are something that McCrae's grandson, Alec McCrae, who's a fine wood carver, he does a lot of step carving, or key patterns and step work, and that's something that for some reason never really caught on in the old Celtic revival, but it's starting to come together pretty good. Actually, Michael Carroll's doing some wonderful things with that as well. It's not something that is quite as symbolic in terms of being easily recognized as part of this culture. But hopefully, it'll probably will become more so.
Sure. People who are interested in Celtic art still may not recognize that as Celtic art, and it is. It's very old.
Oh yeah, and it's And it's exciting. It's not easy. One, there's three things about Celtic art that were made it special when we were learning. Some of this has changed a bit, but one was that it's this belief that everything meant something. Every little twist and turn is symbolic, and that's a bit of an exaggeration, And then the other is that it's absolutely native to the to the Irish or to the Celts, the Scots, and that was based somewhat on the idea that Ireland was never invaded by the Romans, but this wonderful thing. And then the other thing about it is that it was just so difficult, so complicated, and that the phrase that this is not the work of men but the work of angels, because it's just so difficult. And this was a great theme in the earlier Celtic revival, because these people were rising out of poverty and the potato famine and all that stuff, and here was physical evidence that the culture was capable of really great, complicated, beautiful things. And this is one of the reasons that the Irish especially glommed on to Celtic art as something that they really wanted to put forward as a great part of their culture.
We're down to just about 60 seconds. We've been talking with Stephen Walker and Greg Hardy about the upcoming local Celtic art exhibit that'll be Friday the 21st until Saturday the 29th in Andover. Any final thoughts, Stephen?
Well, we are going to have a party for the opening reception, which will start 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday. We do have one visitor coming from Florida specifically to see this, and we've got another couple coming down from Syracuse. But I imagine other than them, it's mainly going to be a local audience and a local thing. So I hope our friends will come out and join us.
Sounds great. Greg Hardy, Stephen Walker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.